although they weren't being given credit for it. They were responsible for, among other things, bringing down the Spanish Empire within 30 years.
Hey, I'm Ray Alessio.
And I'm Alfred Nixon.
And welcome to Prophets and Prophets. So today's going to be an interesting one. We have a very, very interesting guest. And before we dive in, I want to say something to anyone who believes in the Bible, especially to those of you who are of Hispanic, of Hispanic descent. The story of the Marrano Jews of Spain, also known in Hebrew as the Bnei Anusim, which means children of the forced ones. So these were Jews who were believers in Jesus, Yeshua, we call him. So you're going to hear the name used in Hebrew as Yeshua, but just know when you hear Yeshua, that's Jesus. And these were Jews who were believers in Jesus, and they were forced into Catholicism under the Spanish Inquisition. So this story is deeply personal, not only as Hispanics, but more importantly as believers in the Bible. Over 200 million Hispanics today, that's nearly a third, are estimated to descend from the Marrano Jews of Spain. These are our stories. But even if that's not your heritage, this episode is for you too, because this history it ties directly into the scriptures that you believe in, the same Bible, the same New Testament, the same faith. So allow me to introduce our guest. Dr. Miles Jones. He's a linguist and a translator with 3 degrees in languages and linguistics. He's the author of several must-read books, including The Writing of God, in which he translated ancient Hebrew inscriptions at Mount Sinai, helping to identify the original alphabet of God. Dr. Jones is also credited with uncovering and translating early Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels, including what he and his team date to the 1st century, works that challenge the conventional Greek-only narrative. Beyond research, he founded the Institute for Accelerated Learning, serving churches, schools, and homeschoolers, and conducts biblical expeditions, including an expedition to Sinai in 2023, looking for archaeological proof of the Exodus, which is another super interesting topic that we will have to get into sometime in the future. So Dr. Jones has a fascinating background as a dedicated teacher and explorer, combining linguistics, biblical text archaeology, and faith, on a mission to restore what he calls the Hebrew heart of the Gospels. So, Dr. Jones, welcome.
Dr. Jones, welcome.
That's a great introduction.
You like that? Thank you. Thank you.
Could I just plug something here for just a moment? We've been translating the Hebrew Gospels. They do exist. They're not supposed to exist, but they do. And we have multiple copies of them. So we've done wonderful compilation of the Hebrew Gospels, starting with the Hebrew book of Matthew, which is extraordinary. We also did the Hebrew book of Revelation. So we've got the beginning and the ending of what is called the Brit Hadashah. It's called the New Covenant in Hebrew, but the Greeks didn't like that, so they tossed the covenant. They didn't want to follow the commandments and statutes. They considered that dead legalism, so they tossed the covenant, and they retermed it the New Testament, which is what you'll read in the book now, that you have the New Testament. So this is a hugely new discovery, to be able to read Yeshua's words in his own Hebrew. And it was, yes, you're right about the Marranos, and the numbers, possibly as many as 200 million, have Marrano blood in them, because they, fleeing the Inquisition, they went all over the world, literally. Now, a lot of them were forced, and that's horrible, really, and that's forbidden in Judaism to do that, although they practiced it. But you don't forget that more of them embraced Yeshua of their own free will. Yeah, you could see some of them maybe thinking which side of the bread is buttered. But the fact is that most of the Marranos embraced Yeshua of their own free will. Yes, there were ones that were forced. There were ones that went back to the practice of Judaism as soon as they were freed. But others did not, and others were converted as well. So the Marranos, which are the Messianics, what they were in just an incredibly important presence in the the discovery and the colonization of the New World. So they're just incredibly important, and that's we came here to talk with you about this morning.
Well,
Yeah.
I got something that I want to kind of get into, and it's always been fascinating for me, and I wanted to get your understanding and perspective of it. Me and Joe Ray was just here talking about it. When it comes to David and Goliath, right? My whole thought process that Goliath was one of from the fallen angels that was intimate with the humans, right?
One of the
The
Nephilim.
Nephilim, they're called.
Yes. What's your thought process behind that, and why did angels even figure out that they can be intimate with a human? How was that possible? Like, what's your thought process on how that even became?
Well, it says they found the daughters of men to be attractive, and so they had intercourse with them, and of them were born the giants. So
How would that happen? They had to go into another body or something. I mean, how would that?
you have to understand that angels appeared to Abraham. They come down. They come from another dimension, as did Yeshua, as did Jehovah when he came to earth. But they are capable of assuming a human form when they pass through into this dimension. They are divine creatures of God, or were, until they rebelled, but they retained the ability to do that. So we have another case of rebellion, just as in Adam, who disobeyed God in eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Everybody rebelling against God. Good thing we don't do that anymore, huh?
Exactly, right?
But why would Adam get all of the blame when it was Eve that engaged? I mean, we actually just had a clip about that on our podcast. Like, Adam was really the one that God really came down on, and obviously Eve, she had some reprimands as well.
I don't think it's a gender issue here. Not that there's not any difference between the genders, but women can be, they can be divine of God as well as men can. So it's not so much a gender issue. It's the fact that it was symbolic of all human beings that we want to rebel against our Father. Have you ever rebelled against your father? It's a part of our nature. And people forget in Genesis 4, it says that that Adam created a son in his own likeness. So we are sons of God, yes, but we're also sons of Adam. And that son of Adam means son of man, which is the description that is used to address Yeshua HaMashiach, the son of God. He's called the Son of Man, which literally in Hebrew means the son of Adam, the first man. So it's just an incredible story. Since Adam was disobedient to God, he threw us all into opposition to Jehovah, and it required that the son of Adam, who we call the Son of Man in Scripture, who was without sin, the descendant of Adam, had to sacrifice himself freely upon the altar of God in order to make us right with God. It says in Leviticus 17:11, so the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I myself, Jehovah himself, has given it to you on the altar to atone for your sins. So through his son, his own flesh and blood, who was sacrificed for us, we are atoned for our sins, because the life of the flesh and the blood, and is the blood that makes atonement. So it's an incredible story of really. I mean, he knew we would do these things. That given free will, we would go crazy with it.
But didn't she eat the fruit first? Is that correct?
Yes, Eve ate the fruit first. But like I'm saying, I don't really consider this a gender issue. There is disobedience in both man and woman.
Yeah,
Why was
Adam partook in that sin.
but Adam ate it second? Why did well, both of them did.
Yeah,
so,
he still ate.
yeah, both of them sinned. So
That's a good question, Ray. And I think the answer is Adam was responsible as the head of the family.
Yes.
These are not idle words that Jehovah is speaking. We are responsible. We're the head of the family, and we do something that is wrong. Nobody else can be blamed for it except for us. We made that decision. Yes, men have been led astray by their wives, our friends, our other people, but it's their responsibility. They shouldn't have been led astray. They should have been stronger. They should have been more moral and more incorruptible. It's on us, guys. We're the head of the family.
Yes.
Jehovah meant it that way, and we're responsible.
So,
like
Doctor, I wanna jump back into get back on track with what we were discussing. And by the way, you might see me reading something, but it's because I took down a lot of notes to prepare for this, and I don't want to leave anything out. So I just made sure to take notes, and I can read. That way I can touch on everything. But quick background. Because we're going to get into talking about the New Testament and the history behind the Hebrew Gospels and all that. So I want to give a quick background to give some context. But basically, the Marranos, like I mentioned, a lot of our ancestors, as Hispanics, a lot of our ancestors, not only Hispanics, because they as Dr. Jones just mentioned, they were all over the world. In Italy, like my ancestors did happen to settle in Italy. I have an Italian last name, but I'm not Italian. I'm Hispanic, but it was initially Perez de Alessio, so Perez from Alessio, which is a small town in southern Italy, and from there they ended up migrating to the Americas. But that's a whole nother story, right? For another day. So they migrated everywhere, they settled everywhere, and they were forced. There were Marrano Jews who were forced into Catholicism, as we mentioned, and a lot of us Hispanics have that background, as well as some others, but in particular, a lot of us Hispanics, that's what led me down this rabbit hole, because I wanted to uncover our own history as Hispanics, and I wanted to go down that rabbit hole, in which I did. And so that's kind of the context of this conversation. But the important thing about the Marranos, even if you're not of Marrano descent, it doesn't matter, because what's important about what they did is they preserved important Hebrew New Testament manuscripts that have been hidden by the Catholic Church, in Catholic Church libraries for hundreds of years, and recently discovered, hidden in the Vatican library, as well as some other Catholic libraries in Europe. It was a severe crime, a severe offense to even have possession of these Hebrew New Testaments, and yet the Marranos had them. So we're going to start with a more in-depth background on who the Marrano Jews were, and then we're going to go over these Hebrew New Testament manuscripts that were recently discovered. And Dr. Miles Jones here played a massive role in this, which is what excited me about having him on here. But they're recently discovered from the Vatican Library and other Catholic libraries throughout Europe. So the question that I have for you to kick this off, Doctor, is I believe that the Marranos descend from the Nazarene Jews or the Ebionite Jews, Both were Jews who believed in Jesus, Yeshua. They both settled in Spain and were labeled heretics by the Catholic Church, just like Marranos were labeled heretics by the church. So my question to you is, I know that you mentioned when we spoke that the Marranos were likely descend from the disciples of John the Baptist. Can you unpack that? And where does that idea come from, and what evidence or threads support it?
Well, the disciples of John the Baptist were called the Ebionites, and you mentioned that, and they were all believers in the Messiah, so they were all messianics. A term that was used first in Antioch. Now, in your Bible, it will say they were first called Christians in Antioch, but that happened centuries later. So, it clearly was backdated into the Bible to validate those names. The holiday Easter was backdated into Acts in order to validate Easter, but that didn't become an official Christian holiday until the 4th century. I mean, hundreds of years later. So there's tweaking going on in the scripture. That's why it's so important that we have discovered it, because I think whether you are, whatever your religious background, you have a right to know what the original Hebrew gospel said, and they're quite different. Quite different. It doesn't change anything that should rock your faith, but there's some very, very important doctrinal issues that are quite obvious that they were changed from when the Hebrew was translated into Greek. The Marranos were they were in Spain. They called it the Second Jerusalem, or the New Jerusalem, because there were after the crash of Israel, the destruction of Israel after a century and a half of war on them by the Romans, many hundreds of thousands of people fled to all parts of the world, and the diaspora, it is called. And Spain had about a half million Jews living there, and about half of them had converted to Messianism and or Roman Catholicism. Some of them just wanted to blend in, but the fact is that the Marranos, they never were Roman Catholics. There were so many, after the persecutions, so many people had either converted or were forced to convert, that there were whole Jewish synagogues that had been left empty, and there were Jewish rabbis that had been converted, and the Spanish were very, very prejudiced against them. The Jew hatred ran really, and these were actual Jewish people. So they really didn't want them sitting in the pews with them. So they're happy to give them these old synagogues, and the rabbis who had been converted were now their priests, and they had the Hebrew Gospels. They were still out there in medieval Spain. These are the first documents I came across, were the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia in Spain. So what do you have here? This is not Roman Catholicism, right? This is a religion that is Hebraic by nature. Then these people were following the Hebrew Gospels. They were following the Tanakh in Hebrew, the Old Testament. They were honoring the Sabbath day and the feast days, all right? So this was, the people said, well, if we're going to follow this new religion, this is basically Hebraic roots, right? So we're gonna, it's about a Hebrew boy made good, Yeshua HaMashiach, who has created this dynamic new religion based on Judaism. So we're going to follow that, and we have the Hebrew Gospels to do so. So a lot of people think, oh, they were all faking it. They were all crypto Jews, but nothing could be farther from the truth. They weren't, some were, but most were not. So we had a dynamic religion going on that was not Catholicism. And that is why the Catholics of the time felt like they needed to erase it. It was an existential threat to their existence. Now, they were absolutely wrong in doing so. Who gave them the authority to kill other congregants, fellow congregants that believed in the Son of God? They had no authority to do that at all. But we know that, right? We know the evil of the Middle Ages, of the pogroms and the Inquisitions and the Crusades, all set into motion to wipe out the enemies of the church. They were power mad. Did they have some good leaders? Yes, they did, and they still do sometimes. All of these churches sometimes had saintly leaders, but then at other times they had people that were really not saintly, that were far more interested in power than salvation. It's an ugly story, right? Isn't it? It's the story of man and his rebellion. So you had these were people were being persecuted in Spain. The Marranos were. The Inquisition. It wasn't the first of the Inquisitions, but it began there and ended in tens of thousands of Marranos, or Messianics, probably a better name for them, were burned to death, and many more in prison. Many of them had all of their property confiscated from them, so they were trying to escape, and many of them ended up in the New World. Although that was forbidden to them, they ended up in the New World.
Dr. Jones, I wanna add to it. My family, we have an old tradition that was pretty much passed down to my grandfather, and who knows how far back it goes, but it was passed down from him to my parents to down to us, that we would always say in Spanish, cochino marrano igual que tu hermano, which means swine, pig, just like your brother. So in English it doesn't make sense, but in Spanish it makes sense. We're calling ourselves Marranos, in code, in secret, just pretty much acknowledging the the identity behind our family. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thought you might find that interesting. And so I have a follow-up question to what you said, and then I'll let Alfred chime in. But so is there proof that the Marranos descend from the Ebionites? Is there proof of that? That the Ebionites settled in Spain?
I'm sure some of them did. The Ebionites split from the Nazarenes pretty early on. They did not believe in the divine birth of Yeshua and John the Baptist. Their book was called The Gospel According to the Ebionites. But they were still believers in the Messiah. So there surely were Ebionites.
Okay, and where can we find that gospel? Is this something that you were able to obtain?
Well, there aren't any originals of any book of the Bible left to us, but it was called the Gospel According to the Ebionites. And we do know that it eliminated the first chapters of Matthew and Luke because they told of the divine birth of both John the Baptist and Yeshua.
Okay.
So that was a problem for them because of monotheism. Gods begetting new gods goes against the Judaic ideas. There's one God, right?
Okay.
And that's it. God
and the word
beget new gods.
And the word Ebionite, for those who don't know, it comes from the Hebrew Evionim, which means poor ones. So, for example, Matthew 5 verse 3, he says, "Blessed are the poor ones." Some, which we'll get into that later on. But we believe that, and we have reason to believe, for example, in the HS 314 manuscript, the Freiburg manuscript, it says, "Blessed are the Evionim" in the Hebrew text. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. But just wanted to throw it out there that it just means poor ones, and it was a title of humility that they took on. So, Alfred, you want to?
Yeah, I have a question. This is shifting a little bit gears off to what you guys are going deep into. I still, it just brings me great wonder of, if you're in heaven and you're in the glory, if you're in heaven and you're in the glory, why would you rebel? Like why would a war go out in heaven? Why would you rebel? And you can mistake me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Satan was a pretty high-ranking angel. I mean, he was probably third or fourth in charge. And he knows, like, you're in the glory. This is your creator. He knows your thoughts. And of course, he gives us free will. But that just doesn't make sense for me, for you to try to go against God, and for you to even have the mindset to get a third of the angels to get on board with that. That's just mind-blowing to me, for you to try to go against your creator, and you're in the glory, you're in heaven. What's your thoughts on that?
It's mind-blowing. But like I said, it's a principle as old as man, rebellion from God, still happening. So I don't know how it should surprise any of us, but God created beings, including man and the angels, with free will, or at least a degree of it.
I just feel like, the angels are obviously held to a higher standard. They're actually in the glory. They're in heaven. They're seeing this. They're experiencing this. People that's on earth, they have faith. They have a relationship with God. But they're not like in heaven. They're not experiencing the glory and seeing the Father and the Son and the Spirit. And then to rebel above all of that, to me, is just wild. When you know that he know your thoughts.
Remember during the Exodus, as the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, just imagine this, God split the waters of the sea, and they crossed the sea on dry land, because you had the wind blowing all night. I mean, this really kind of a proof of the authenticity of this. Of course, the sea bottom is going to be mud up to your hip, probably. And he had the wind blowing it all night long to dry it out. And so these people walked through the sea with the walls of water on both sides.
It's crazy.
And when you read in the Bible, it's clear they're in awe of this. They're even in awe of the memory of it later on. However, the very people that experienced it, did that keep them from rebelling?
No, they continued to rebel.
Did not keep them from rebelling.
Yeah, even after
how many
seeing
people that left Egypt actually entered into the promised land? Only 2, right? Joshua and Caleb were the only 2.
He continued to go on to say that he wanted to be like the Most High God.
Yes. That was his downfall.
Why would you? You can't be like the Most High God. He's your creator. He's the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. Like, I just don't understand. You already got a powerful position in heaven.
I don't get it either.
This don't make sense. Our life would be much greater if he obeyed.
That shows you the wickedness of evil.
I agree with you, but think of this. Every single religion that has sprung up eventually claims that its leader is the very, Catholics, the Pope is the vicarious presence of Christ himself. He is there in place of Christ. So they become the Godhead figure, the leader of the church. They are the spokesman, the prophet, or whatever they call themselves. But they are sitting in Moses' seat. They're sitting in the place of authority given to them by God. And the kings that rule over us by the divine right of kings, it is said. So, because God himself has given them authority over us. So everybody's getting on the bandwagon and claiming they have direct authority over others because God gave it to them. And
Well,
if you disagree with that, they'll send their armies to wipe you out.
Well, I have fonder of you know, the Bible has to be fulfilled. Even things that's going on today. When Jesus came, he just knew one of the disciples will betray him. He knew that, and that had to be fulfilled, and he had to betray him. And so my question is for the disciple that betrayed him, Lazarus, did he go to hell, or did he have a chance to make it in? Because this, I would hate to be the one to be picked to betray God. Like, I wouldn't want to have that destiny, right? So do we have a chance, or?
They knew he would because they knew him.
Yeah.
They weren't forcing him to play that role. And he could have refused. But, God knows who we are, and he knows we either will do what he says or we won't eventually. But it's still our free will to change our own destiny. So, and he had seen all the miracles that Yeshua had
He was
performed.
with this. I don't understand these people, man. You with this man. Like, I don't get it, man. It's mind-boggling to me. You're in the presence. You're with him. You're eating with him. You're seeing the miracles. Why would you try to trade him for money? Are you serious?
I'm with you on this 30 pieces of silver. But I would like to step back into our discussion on the Marranos in the New World.
Sure.
Because this is a story of God's victory over evil that everyone needs to know. We all know the Inquisition, and whether you know it or not, I mean, it's horrifying. Is it not what they did to these believers?
Mm-hmm.
And they had to flee because of this. And this is all part of God's plan. They fled to every part of the world, but in the new world, they were about 15% of every colony, Messianic of every colony in the New World, every single one. In some places there are more. In Jamaica, there were 50% of the population. And so we have just an enormous, and considering the percentage of the population they were in the world's population, which was rather minuscule, being 15% of all the colonists in the New World is just mind-blowing. And they had, many of them managed to get out with their own money. In fact, this led them to create an international banking system where you could, because the Spanish didn't want you taking your money out of there. So they developed a system where they would deposit in a bank their money, and they'd get a draft on it, which they could use anywhere in the world. In the New World, are the same thing when during the age of the pirates, which they're very much involved in. You didn't want to carry gold around if you were sailing in pirate water. So if you could deposit it in a bank and then carry a draft on it as you went back to the old world, you were completely safe. And they needed to get their money out. So they developed this system. Totally based on trust. It's what the credit system is based on today, where they could deposit their money and carry a draft on it. So they had money, and they could obtain money if they had good credit to do any enterprise they wanted in a new world, as long as they could prove that it is successfully bringing in profits. Now we're getting to the second half of your theme, profits and profits. So they were huge shipbuilders. They were actually forbidden in many, many professions, but nobody could stop them from building ships, because you're going across international borders and everything from country to country. So you could nobody can make that illegal. You're only, you can make it illegal in your country, I suppose. But being a shipbuilder, was a huge trait for Messianics. Now we have a lot of them were in this interesting interplay between the Messianics and the Jews. A lot of they lived together in community. Sometimes there was friction between them, but in general, it's a little bit hard to tweak them apart all the time. So, but you had Messianics and Jews working in tandem on a lot of these things. And one of the most important things that they did is they banded together to create a surrogate navy to take down the Spanish Empire, which is just breathtaking in its audacity. They invited the English to come and take Jamaica, all right? And
Wow.
they did, because they were 50%, Messianic. So they arrived there, shot a volley, everybody surrendered, and then two of the Messianic officers, Jamaicans, came forward, already had the peace treaty signed, so they just signed. It was done, all right? And then the British invited all the pirates, now called buccaneers, all the pirates of the Caribbean to make Jamaica their home. And Nassau also, but basically Jamaica became the home of the pirates. And they were given letters of marque, which no longer makes them pirates. They're now privateers. And they are legally, they can attack Spanish shipping because the Spanish are the enemies of the English. So the English are legitimizing them to go out and take Spanish property as long as they share a cut of it with the English. So boom, created a navy overnight. And where did this navy come from? It came from the Messianics and their ships, and they captained those ships sometimes, and they crewed those ships sometimes, but obviously there were pirates from all different traditions and all parts of the world, and yeah, they robbed and killed and raped their way across the Caribbean, and
Wow.
they took so much gold and silver from the Spanish that in 30 years, literally within 30 years, they broke the back of the Spanish Empire, and their empire started to fall apart.
How did they
So much
take
money
the
from them.
How did they just ambushed them, just killed them, and just outpowered them to take that gold and silver? Like, how did they?
They had ships. They had pirate ships. The pirates all flocked to Jamaica to be legitimized with these letters of marque. By the way, that's in our Constitution, because we used them too during the American Revolution. That became our Navy. We had no Navy, and we were going up against the premier sea power of the world, the English. So it's in Section 1, Part 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, letters of marque, which we would give to. So they were our Navy during the American Revolution, and during the second encounter we had, the War of 1812. They were our Navy. In fact, the pirate Lafitte, who was Messianic, teamed up with Andrew Jackson to defend the port of New Orleans and defeated them. He provided them with the artillery, with the ships to keep the English at bay. The English had to march through the swamps to get to New Orleans. They couldn't just belly up to the wharves in New Orleans and let off the soldiers, because the pirate Lafitte and his fleet were holding them at bay, away from New Orleans, and they lost that battle. If they had taken the mouth of the Mississippi River, they would have controlled the entire Mississippi River basin, which goes all the way up to Canada and comprises about a third of the continental United States. So our western movement would have been halted. We would have had another war with the English for sure. So it would be more blood, and it would definitely have hindered us from going west as we eventually did. So that's a messianic thing there. But the immediately after Columbus, who was a messianic as well, It's well known. He burned his family history so people would not know, but he was very definitely Messianic. He and his voyage was financed by Messianics, in particular Luis Santangel and Gabriel Sanchez. That people say, "Oh well, Queen Isabella, she pawned her crown jewels for the to finance Columbus's voyage." Well, that's simply not true. It's spin so she could gain some recognition having done it. It was actually financed by Luis Santangel was the treasurer of Isabel and Ferdinand, the king and queen of Spain. So he financed, and their sons went with him on that journey because they needed to find a safe place away from the Inquisition. They were trying to pull down all the most important people in government that were Messianics. And so they called them heretics, throw them in prison, confiscate their property. So they sent their sons with Columbus on this voyage. Never heard this part of the history, have you?
I've heard a lot of this. I've heard, but you're definitely, even to me, you're bringing some new information.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's a Messianic story.
Yeah.
So the Messianics, just to give you just a hint of how important their influence was in the world, Columbus was a Messianic. The navigators of many ships were Messianics, and they actually discovered the routes to the New World and to India and China, which was extremely important. That's what all this exploration activity was about, to find the treasures that were in the far off distant trading places like India. Spices. Why was that so important? Just so you can have some curry on your food? Not really. We're talking about spices, not just for flavor, but they preserved food. Salt is one of them. They didn't have enough salt. Once they were able to obtain enough spices to preserve food so they can get it to the marketplace before it spoils, the population of Europe tripled overnight because there was more food. There was more food in the marketplace. They could use it on their vegetables, they could use it on their meats, and get them to market before they were able to be preserved for long periods of time, actually. So it made a huge difference. It was not, I don't know what people think. Why were the spices so important? But the silks were a fabric that were extremely valuable, Chinese porcelain. So this is what happened. After 1492, when Columbus, discovered the New World, this is where the prophets part comes in. Prophets with an
Diary 120.
yeah, but about 8 years after Columbus made his voyage, right? That would be in 1500. They discovered the eastern route to China, the sea route to China. So you have a situation in here where the whole world opened to them. Far more countries than they knew about. They basically knew about Europe. Nobody had ever sailed more than 300 kilometers from the mainland of Europe. And now Columbus finds the way to get on the trade winds going east. And in 1 month, he's 2,000 miles away from the coast of England. They're freaking out away from the continent of Europe. And the sailors are freaking out, and they mutiny or try to. So he says 3 days more. He negotiated 3 days more. And on the morning of that final day, where they were going to have to turn around, they sighted land. So there's an enormous discovery. And then came the discovery of the route to China. And so now you've got this big market going on. And within decades, they discovered gold and silver deposits, and particularly silver. Potosi, they found a mountain of silver. I mean, it's 50% pure silver ore. Right, that's almost unheard of. So they would go, the Spanish scallions would go to West Africa, and they would get slaves there, especially West African slaves, because they have a genetic resistance to malaria, which was killed about 3/5 of all the colonists that settled in the swampy areas of Virginia, et cetera, and so on. So they bought these slaves that would do the work. Well, obviously, getting them from slave traders in Africa was super cheap, and they sold for exponentially more when they got to the New World. So they've already quadrupled their investment so far. Then they go to Potosi and they pick up silver at the source. And it's so cheap there that the captains of the pirate ships they were literally shoeing their horses with silver horseshoes. You can imagine how much silver was there. So they fill up their boats with silver from the massive profit they just made from the slave trade. And I'm sure some of them were Messianics. Most were not. But they come, then they go on the route, they carry on the route to China. Now, China in the 1500s, and this we're in the after 1492, we're in the 1500s year, they had so mismanaged their currency through inflation, et cetera, and so forth, that their currency actually had collapsed. So they had no viable means of currency of exchange. Now, they did use silver, but it was so rare and so precious that it was incredibly expensive. And now these Spanish galleons come into Chinese ports full of silver.
And silver was more valuable, you would think, than gold to them, being that it was so rare back then.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And now these Spanish galleons come in chock full of all this silver. They can buy anything they want with it. And China has the most trading goods of any country in the world at this time. They've been a civilization for a long time. They've got precious porcelains that are very expensive in Europe, and many, many other things, as well as books and knowledge and these kind of things. But so they fill up on those, right? Again, so they've probably multiplied their profits by 10 times by this point. They're not even back to Europe yet. Then they go to India and they trade for spices. So they come back into Europe, having made an obscene amount of money on the trading route that they just went on, selling slaves to the New World to do the work, picking up on silver, going to China, spending that massive amount of silver they've gotten on incredible trading goods that are very valuable in Europe, and then picking up on spices in India. I mean, the money, Europe was awash in money. At least the people like the Messianics and the Jews and others who managed the trade routes and the shipbuilding and the ships that went on these routes all over the world. Remember, this is the first time, right? It's the first time the whole world has been open to them. And there's an influx of new books and knowledge, which you just can't underestimate how valuable they are. I mean, Europe had been standing still in medicine, and now the books of Galen, which came from the East, the Arabs, through Messianic Spain, and were translated back into European languages. The medical books of Avicenna and Galen the Greek. These were like pumping adrenaline into the old world economy, and these people were awash with money. They're getting new crops, food crops from the New World. Corn is one example. They were getting new animals from the New World, new knowledge, new arts, new everything. And these people took that money that they were awash in from world trade, and they spent it on something very interesting called the Renaissance. They began to sponsor their favorite artists. their favorite scientists and people that were doing really, really good works that were renowned in every area of the arts and sciences. And the Renaissance was just an explosion of all of this worldwide activity that just multiplied the knowledge that we had, brought in new books, new knowledge, new crops, new animals, new opportunities, new things that had already been discovered that we didn't know about. It's just an explosion. You could just go on and on about the Renaissance, but it was an explosion of knowledge and advancement in every art and science. And it led to something called the Reformation, in which these new books and things that have been discovered were written up in the in the vernacular languages of Europe. And within 30 years of that happening, 2/3 of Europe became Protestant. Right? And where did these books come from? Well, they came from the Messianic areas of northern Italy. They had preserved the earlier forms of the Gospels in the Old Testament. Also in the Eastern Orthodox area of Constantinople. So you've just got all these forces coming together, but all of them, there's a huge messianic influence of all of these things going on. They were the masters of world trade. They were the masters of international banking. They were not the only ones. There were other Jews and other Gentiles involved in these things, but they played a predominant force in these things because of who they were. So you just have it's just an explosion of knowledge, an explosion of new ideas, of new ways to handle the world that has just been opened up to them. An incredible time to be alive, and the Messianics were, in some ways, directing it all. They were right in the forefront of world trade, in the forefront of the Renaissance, in the forefront of the Reformation. And they don't get any credit for it because the church told us that they were declared heretic in the 4th century and that by the 5th century they had all disappeared. But that is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. And we have that record, and that's what we've written up. May I show my book? Part of what I've told you comes from Messianic Church Arising, the history of the Messianic movement in the Messianic Church. And all these stories come out of there. So behind the scenes, although they weren't being given credit for it, they were responsible for, among other things, bringing down the Spanish Empire within 30 years, being the progenitors of the Renaissance and the Reformation. Pretty interesting story, is it not? About prophets and prophets.
Yeah, no, and that's fascinating. Do you have anything you want to say about?
No, I was, when I look at what you going back to your 1500 years ago, you would say that China was a more established country, of course, than the United States. They've been around and established for a very long time, opposed to the United States, correct?
Oh, absolutely. That's why they're so organized as a trading nation, because they were unified, or at least at various times in their history. Their problem is that they tend to fragment. You've got China's not all one thing. They tend to fragment, and that might be happening again. We will see. But like all major civilizations, they tend to come apart at the seams. Happened at least 3 times in Egyptian history. All major empires tend to have this problem.
Now, Doctor, I want to ask you about the manuscripts, right? I want to get into that because this is I'm fascinated by the history of these manuscripts. In particular, one that really caught my attention is the Freiburg HS 314 manuscript, which is held in Germany, in Freiburg, Germany, at the university library over there. So I guess my question to you is: was it a translation from the Greek? There's a Latin note at the end that reads, This manuscript contains a Hebrew version of the entire New Testament made according to the Greek text. Can you confirm this, that it is according to the Greek text, and speak to its significance, or was this just put there to cover their backs, saying that it comes from the Greek in case this manuscript was confiscated?
I would assume they were covering themselves. I can tell you this, every translation, every book of the Hebrew Gospels is claimed to be a translation from the Greek or Latin. For you to have such a translation would get you burned at the stake. Remember that the Inquisition went on for 356 years. It lasted until the Civil War in the United States. 356 years, and they were still burning people at the stake. So, yeah, of course, you're going to say it's a translation from Greek or the Latin. They always did. If they'll keep you alive, you'll say that. But what we do, we use methods that have nothing to do with those claims. We look at the Hebrew content of it. That's what's going to tell you, because now we have enough manuscripts. We've studied them enough to know where the markers of the Hebrew Gospels are. By marker, I mean something that is in the Hebrew that is not in the Greek, all right? So when we know what these markers are, we take a new manuscript like the Freiburg HS 314, and we immediately start looking for the Hebrew markers in there. And the Freiburg gives us, it's one of the most reliable volumes as far as the Hebrew markers are concerned, markers of the Hebrew gospel. So what's a marker? Do you mind if I explain? It is where you have something, let's say Matthew 5:17 says, I swear unto you that not a yod or a tittle shall be removed from Torah until all these things have come to pass. Okay, well, why would the Greeks took that out of the Bible? They called it a jot and a tittle, when any translator would tell you it was a yod, because that's a Hebrew letter, right? So what is that telling you? It's telling you that the original gospel came from Hebrew, right? And a tittle is mainly just a serif, a little decorative. It's the tip of the yod, actually. Not even the yod.
It's an tittle
The
like
tip
a
of a yod will be removed from Scripture until everything comes to pass. Well, you can't have that if you're claiming it all came from Greek. Another one would be in Revelation, where it says, I am the Aleph and the Tav. Well, you can't leave that in there. That indicates its Hebrew origin, so you're going to change that to Greek. These are markers, but they can be other things too. How many wise men were there who came to bow and worship the newborn king? Well, we all know.
We don't know.
3. Well, you said you don't know, and that's right. If you look in your Greek Bible, you will not find it anywhere. You know where you do find it? You find it in the Hebrew Gospels.
Really? So it says 3 in the Hebrew Gospels? I haven't looked that
It
up.
absolutely does say 3 in the Hebrew
Wow.
Gospels. It says when Herod was mad at them because the 3 wise men did not come back and report on where the baby Yeshua was, the baby Jesus, so he could kill him. He's already planning to kill him. This is a pretender to the throne. Of course he's going to kill him.
So, in which manuscript is this one in? Is this in the EBR 100 from the Vatican, that Hebrew gospel, or is it in the Freiburg HS 314?
Those are 2 that are very firm, that have most of the Hebrew markers, but they overlap. They don't have all of them. That's why we always do a compilation of all of the best manuscripts that are out there. I'm trying to remember. I think it's in the Freiburg.
Okay.
It may be in both.
Interesting.
But usually you find Hebrew markers, you find them in more than one manuscript, right? Like they said that was called the prologue to Luke. Basically, the prologue to Luke says it's a copy from the from the ministers that came before, who had written about it and sent them to the authors of Luke. These are the Greek authors of Luke when it was translated into Greek, and they're trying to like shore up their authority by saying this. Oh, we got it directly from those who are the original ministers of the word, and then we copied it. I copied it for you. So it says it's a copy. So if you've got, that's not in the Hebrew. So if you've got two manuscripts, that one says it's a copy and the other one does not say it's a copy, which one is likely to be the original? The one that does not claim to be a copy, right?
Right.
And this is a Hebrew marker of the gospel, the missing first 4 verses of Luke. It's in practically every Hebrew manuscript. It's the Greek part that was added in there to buttress their authority because they'd gotten it from the original. Well, the original people spoke Hebrew, not Greek. So, that's in most Hebrew Gospels that I've ever found. So there are many, many other markers of the Hebrew. That's the reason that we do a Hebrew translation. If it was all like the Greek, what would be the point of it? Like I said, it's nothing that should affect one's faith. God is still God. Yeshua is still the Son of
The
God.
message is still the same. The message
Yeah,
is still
the
the same.
basics are still the same, but there are some important doctrinal issues that are different, and they were changed because the Greeks established the Greco-Roman Church is a new religion that has rejected the old religion. It's rejected Judaism, and it has rejected the Messianic movement. I mean, and I don't care whether you call him Christ or Yeshua. This was his church, and they had not corrupted. They had not become corrupt. They were just not Greek. So they were declared heretic in the 4th century when the new religion, the new Greco-Roman religion came into play.
Now, Doctor, I wanna ask you a question about this HS 314 manuscript. So in Matthew 5 verse 3, most manuscripts translate poor in spirit as anie, but HS 314 uses the Hebrew word evionim for poor ones. Do you think this was intentional, possibly a theological link to the Ebionites? Maybe like kind of just like a nod, the early Jewish followers of Yeshua?
It does say Ebionim, but that can also be translated as humble. This is in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the humble. But they do it. The thing is that it appears twice. It's interesting because it says in Matthew 5:3, blessed are the humble in spirit, for they shall receive the kingdom of heaven. And then it says in 5:4, again, blessed are the humble, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, sometimes that is translated as the poor in spirit, basically because, okay, the poor, the humble just inherited the kingdom of heaven, and now they're inheriting the earth. That's giving a lot to them, right? You can see why people would say that doesn't seem right. They're getting everything. But if you remember in Matthew 28:19, Yeshua says, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. So he then gives to his followers to go and baptize all the nations of the earth. These two blessings to the humble, Matthew 5:3, where they're given heaven as an inheritance, and Matthew 5:4, where they're given the earth as an inheritance, they're given to those followers who have humbled themselves before Yehovah, as Yeshua has done. This is also mentioned in Revelation. These are the people who rule with them on their throne, and they're the humble people. Why it was translated poor in spirit. Evionim it does mean humble, but it can mean poor too, what you're talking about. But poor in spirit means exactly what it seems to say. Why is he giving to people that are poor in their spirit, that have no strong spirit? Why is he giving them the inheritance of the earth? That doesn't make any sense. So you're right, they do use the word Ebionim, They're not really, in this case, they're not referring to the Ebionites in this case. If they were believers in Yeshua, they were, they were in as far as the Nazarenes were concerned. But you have this come up. I mean, you have the Nephilim are mentioned when they're not talking about the giants or the sons of the giant. They're talking about the fallen ones of Israel. So that comes from word means to fall down. So in this case, Evinim is not a reference to the Ebionites. They are not really mentioned anywhere, but the Nazarenes were more orthodox, and they adopted the greater church's orthodoxy. It didn't keep the greater church from trying to destroy them, because they were Hebraic roots in their nature, and they were creating a Greek church. That is important. So they had a replacement theology that said everything that was given to the Hebrews now belongs to the Gentile church, right? And the Judaic church was now declared heretical because they had killed God. They had killed the Son of God himself. And for doing that, there can be no possible forgiveness. Although it was actually the Romans who killed God. But that's just a detail. We can skip that over and blame it on the Jews, right? So those are the doctrinal issues we're talking about. They're very important. To skip over the Roman church giving the Roman state a pass on having destroyed Yeshua, the Son of God, and blaming it all on the Jews, that's a doctrinal thing.
So Doctor, I want to ask you a question about the Nazarenes. So you believe that the Ebionites were the ones who later became Marranos after settling in Spain. And what about the Nazarenes? Do you think they also settled in Spain and later became Marranos?
Yes. There wasn't really a separation of these two to that extent. They were both Jewish by blood, by nature, by culture. And so I think the distinction between the Ebionites and the Nazarenes probably didn't mean much as you got into the medieval times, where they were basically burning people at stake for anything they could think of, the most minor of things. So really, that kind of got lost in the wash. I don't know that the Ebionites survived as a church entity, if you would say that. And I think that's what you're thinking, that the Ebionites as an organizational church movement survived all that. And I don't see that. But they did have their own gospel, the gospel according to the Ebionites. And we do know, we don't have any copies of it, but we do know basically how it was different. They did not believe in the divine birth of John and Yeshua.
Yeah.
So I want to mention something that I want to give some insight as far as based on just a few different factors, right? So the word Maran in Aramaic means our Lord. So Maran Yeshua would be our Lord Jesus, right? And so a lot of so for example, the term, when we say in Spanish colombiano, venezolano, someone from Venezuela, someone from Colombia, they would have the colombiano is someone for Colombia. So someone who followed Maran Yeshua would be called Marrano, right? With one R. Just like someone who's a Christian is called Cristiano in Spanish. So Marrano was a follower of Maran Yeshua. Then they later on added an R to it, and then they turned it into something derogatory, which means a pig. So, which is where Marrano comes into play. Now, there's evidence of this, and you see all over the small towns in Italy that they're named after Marrano something, and it's not an Italian word. but they have Marrano, and nobody really knows where that term comes from in Italy. But then something else that's interesting is you have the Maronite Christians over in Syria, Lebanon region. And these Maronite Christians, they're said to be descendants of these same Nazarenes or Ebionites who settled in the area and were later converted to Catholicism. Same historical connection to the Marranos. But the Maronites, in Hebrew, it's Maranim, which are followers of Maran. And there's actually a book called The Maronites in History by Mati Musa, where it says that the term Maronite came from the word Maran. And this was from an 11th century document. And of course, now they try to say that the Maronites, that name does not come from Maran. But this is what the book says about this 11th century document. And it says that the 11th century Maronite writer Duma Thomas, Bishop of Gafatab, in his 10 treatises, states that the term Maronite derived from Maran, a Syriac term meaning our Lord Jesus Christ, and that Maran was the name of a monastery after which the Maronites were named. So I thought that was something interesting that I wanted to share with you.
Well, that is interesting. And we know that one of the outgrowths of this word Maran is the reference to Lord called Maranatha. So that's another aspect of it.
Yeah. That's actually in the Jewish Encyclopedia as well. The Jewish Encyclopedia says that the origin of Marrano is from Maranatha.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I agree with that as far as Marranos go. I think it's possible they may have thought that, which is good. But Marrano does come from the word pig because it's something the Roman Catholics laid upon them and says everything about what they thought of them. They would force them to eat pig in order, as part of the conversion process. They would force them to do what is an abomination. And they called them Marranos, which is a real derogatory thing that they said to her. So I've never read of the connection between Marrano. As far as we know, it comes from pig. I'm not saying there's not a connection. I've just never run across it.
Yeah, something to look into for sure.
Yeah, it is. And were they the descendants of the Ebionites? That's another connection that hasn't been made, but it could be. So it's definitely something to look into.
Yeah, and something else that I want to share with you, something prophetic, right? The half of the theme of the show, prophets and prophets. So I want to share something prophetic about the Marranos, and I'm going to read here because I have some notes here. But it's something prophetic about the Marranos that I want to mention, and I believe it all ties in together. So, I want to tie it all in together, and I think you'll like this. Obadiah the prophet speaks in Obadiah 1:20. You know about this. Obadiah 1:20 about the exiles of Jerusalem in Sepharad, which is Spain, Sfarad. Then there's Obadiah, the man from 1 Kings 18, verse 3, who hid the prophets from Queen Jezebel, in Hebrew, Isabel, right? The parallel is here because during the Spanish Inquisition, the Marranos had to hide from Queen Isabella. They had to hide from Queen Isabella, which is the Spanish form of Jezebel, derived from her Hebrew name, Isabel. So there's an interesting connection between Obadiah 1:20 and the exiles of Jerusalem in Spain. The story of Obadiah, who hid the prophets from Jezebel, the Queen Jezebel, and the Marranos in Spain, who hid from Queen Isabel. So just wanted to share that with you. And then there's another one that I think you might find interesting, that the persecution and the Spanish Inquisition lasted 430 years in total, similar to the Exodus, or similar to Israel, the Israelites in Egypt. So we're talking about from the 1391 pogroms that kicked off the persecution on the Marranos to 1821, when the Inquisition officially ended in Latin America after the Spaniards were defeated. So 1391 to 1821 is exactly 430 years under persecution, the exact number of years Israel spent in bondage in Egypt. So I believe that the Marranos were the fulfillment of that verse in Obadiah, and they were prophetic exiles preserving the faith in hiding, waiting for restoration, and the 430 years of persecution confirms that this is prophetic.
That's an interesting theory. I think they're playing with the numbers a little bit. There's been more than one Inquisition. And this one started, the Spanish Inquisition started in 1478. But there were previous Inquisitions, and there were later Inquisitions. Generally, you had to ask the Pope to get a bull permission to do it. But there's a lot of interesting things about it. The Marranos played a central part in all of these things. Isabella at first was very pious towards her, and she had a lot of Jewish subjects, and she's very protective of them. But she was eventually convinced by the Grand Inquisitor that they had to be rid Spain of them, and this was an important decision because they did. The Jews were run out, expelled, and the Marranos, or the Messianics, they fled the Inquisition. So what they did is they deprived their country of all their professionals, their doctors, their lawyers, their doctors, and their translators. They completely stripped their country of all their intellectual, members that were doing such important work. And they were kept afloat by all this treasure coming from the New World. And so once that treasure was cut off and they had lost all of their professionals, their thinkers, their doers, their achievers, their innovators, then they regressed rapidly. Their population sank from 40 million to like 14 million, and they became a third world country. And I was in Spain in my youth. It didn't look anything like it does today. It looked like Mexico of the same era, which was really poor. And that's happened in my lifetime. So they really regressed to third world status after they did those two things. Ran all the brain drain out of Spain and Portugal. Expelled their Hebrew and their Messianic professionals. It killed them. And then when they lost the wealth coming up due to the surrogate navy that the Messianics and the British put together to take them out, they lost big time. They regressed very, very fast. Frankly, knowing what they had done to the Messianics, imprisoning them without trial, without even any notification. They didn't get any notification of what they'd been accused of until the day they were going to be punished for it. It was horrendous what happened to them. So I frankly did not blame the Messianics creating a surrogate navy that, robbed, raped, and killed their way across the New World. They basically started attacking all of the villages of the Spanish Main. They would even use the Inquisition torture elements that they've gotten. They shut down the Inquisition. But in the meantime, at this point, they would use that to actually torture the people of means from the Spanish colonization until they gave up where they hid their money. Because before the presence of banks, a lot of money, people hid it. And so they would torture them using the very instruments of the Inquisition to get their money. But they took so much money from the Spanish, it crashed them. So it's an interesting part of history, and there's a lot of stories there that have never been told, because the Messianic Church, the Church of Yeshua HaMashiach, is not supposed to exist anymore. But guess what? It does. I mean, there are so many Messianics in Latin America. Are people that have a Messianic background that they may only dimly remember. But I've been down there, and I know it. I went down to a retreat in Mexico, and it's way out in the mountains, out in the sticks. But I got there. It was a journey, and I come up there, and there's this big sign that says Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, so it's a huge thing. It has not died, and it is coming back. And these people, many of them are of Messianic blood. Not that it matters. It only matters if you believe in the Messiah, the Hebrew Messiah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, this has been very interesting. It's been an incredible dialogue. I've just been taking in a lot. I've learned a lot here. And it's been incredible. I think even for the viewers, I think they're going to be able to download and be able to learn a lot that you shared here with us.
We have one final question before you make your final offer. One final question.
Absolutely. And we'll get you out here, get you out here. And like I said, for me, this has been an incredible dialogue. And so we got a question for you. Would you ever consider creating a interlinear version of these Hebrew testaments and manuscripts
Of the Hebrew New Testament?
I think that'd be huge for a lot of the viewers and just a lot of people, even myself. Like, I just learned a lot here. Would you be open to creating that, like a download where people can copy and paste?
We have created an interlinear already. It's what we do our translations from. And we were going to publish it like along with Matthew, but Matthew is already pretty thick. It would make it a 1,200 page document.
Wow.
It's right, 500. It might make it more like a 1,500 page document. It's too big. So what we do is we have them available in our archives, these interlinears. We have an interlinear on every verse in Matthew. And you can see the process of how we came to translate them. And
is there any way we can know the exact where to find these interlinear? Because we want to
we are going to open them to the public. We haven't yet, because we want them to be complete.
Oh, but it's coming. It's in the works.
Yeah, it's there. We've done them. And we are I will talk to my people about it and say, okay, when are we going to start opening these?
Yeah, because I want to read it in Hebrew like yesterday. I want to start reading the Hebrew yesterday because I want to really dive into it.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. So yes, that's in the works, because we want this to be the place to come to where if you want to study the Brit Hashah, the New Covenant doctrines and words of Yeshua in Hebrew, that's the place to come. Whether you agree or disagree, all the information you need is right there. And whether you want to do your own translation or whatever, it's all there.
Well, we'll certainly appreciate your time here, man. Where could the viewers find you? Could you talk a little bit more about your books, where they can get access to?
Yeah, make your offer, whatever you want to plug.
Well, what I wanted to do is we have done a little media piece on the major accomplishments of the Messianic Church through the centuries that you surely don't know about. And there's, 19 of them, huge accomplishments. And we want to offer that. It's kind of like a PowerPoint, but it's not exactly a PowerPoint. But it just lists them all and explains them. So I just wanted to offer it to your viewers, if they would like it, for free. If you go to writingofgod.com and just give us your email, and we'll send you this document, and we'll also send you a newsletter talking about our latest research and what we're coming up with. But that should be exciting. So writingofgod.com. And
writingofgod.com.
Writing of God.
there's a thing on there called free downloads, and that's where we'll send it to you from, or I'll have it up there. You can just contact us and say, please send me the achievements of the Messianic Church over 20 centuries, and we'll send it to you.
We want to make sure it's clear for the viewers. Is it the writing of God or writing of God?
We own both addresses. We have both those domain names.
Either is fine. Writing of God.
Yes, either one is fine.
Okay.
Well, there you have it, man. This has been an incredible dialogue, man. We have the man, the myth, the legend, someone that has just studied and put his time and invested his life to learning all of this and going deep and being able to give you the value here. The writingofgod.com. Make sure you tap in. Miles, it's certainly been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a blessing for me
I appreciate it.
to be able to express the incredibly fascinating story. The Latin community, which is just full of people that are either Hebraic roots or have the Hebraic roots background. So it's wonderful to be able to share this with you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, Miles. Appreciate you.
We appreciate you, man.
God bless you. God bless you. We'll
Have
talk
a
soon.
blessed day.
Take care.
Likewise.